Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. It was late November in Colorado, and I must have been about 7, maybe 8 years old. My dad got the idea that we should do something different that weekend. He wanted to rent a cabin in the mountains and spend a few days there together. My mom also thought it was a great idea. She said it would be good for us to have some family time, far away from everything. Just her, my dad, my sister, and me. I didn't complain, especially because it meant skipping school that Friday so we could leave early. The drive felt long, and by the time we finally arrived at the cabin, the sun was already sinking behind the trees. The air was biting cold, the kind that makes your breath come out in little white clouds. I remember thinking it was even colder than I had expected for November. But my dad just laughed and said, "That's how the Rockies are." We went in carrying our bags and settled in. The cabin smelled faintly of old wood and smoke, as if it hadn't been used much lately. My parents chose their bedroom. My sister and I claimed ours, and a little while later, we were already eating a simple dinner and talking about what we would do the next day. That first night it was too dark to go out exploring, so we all went to bed. I don't know why, but I had a hard time falling asleep. Maybe it was because the bed creaked every time I moved. Or maybe it was the unfamiliar sounds of the forest. At some point in the night, I heard crunching noises outside, like footsteps on frozen leaves. Out of curiosity, I pulled back the curtain and squinted into the darkness, but I couldn't make out anything. I told myself it had to be some animal. However, about 15 minutes later, the sound came again, this time louder. I shook my sister to wake her up. She was 11 back then. She also stayed listening. Her eyes went wide and she whispered, "Do you hear that?" The two of us crept quietly to the window, and we thought we saw something moving right at the edge of the tree line. To avoid being seen, we ducked down immediately. We barely slept for the rest of the night. When morning came, everything felt normal again. Mom was at the stove making breakfast, and Dad was already outside. I asked if I could go out to help him, and she said yes. My sister stayed in the kitchen, still rubbing her eyes to chase away the sleep. As soon as I stepped outside, I saw my dad talking to someone I didn't know. It was a short, stocky man, with a shaved head and a dark green veteran's cap pulled down low over his forehead. He seemed nervous. That's the word, I think. He was sweating even though it was freezing cold. My dad turned around and introduced me. "This is my son," he said proudly. The man gave me a brief smile and said, "My name is Patrick. Nice to meet you, kid." I greeted him back, but I blurted out, "You look scared. Are you okay?" He let out a little cough, almost like a laugh, and answered, "I'm fine. Just a bit of war shock. I served in the army." I remember nodding even though it was obvious from his cap. At first, Patrick seemed pretty friendly. He told my dad that he was staying in a nearby cabin with his family and had come over to say hello. My dad invited him in for breakfast, and everything felt normal. Afterward, Dad, Patrick, and I went back outside. While we were out there, I slipped on a patch of ice and scraped my knee. It stung, and I started to cry. My dad ran inside because my mom was calling him, leaving me with Patrick. Patrick immediately crouched down and said, "Don't worry, little guy. I've got bandages in my cabin. Come on, I'll fix you up." Without thinking too much, I agreed. I was a kid, and it didn't occur to me that going with him might not be the best idea. On the way, he asked me casual questions at first. What games I liked, what I did for fun. Then he started asking weird things. What shoe size I wore, how much I weighed. I didn't really know those answers, except for my age, so that's what I told him. He chuckled and said, "Good to know." That was when I realized his cabin was not close at all. It took us almost half an hour walking through the forest to get there. My knee had stopped bleeding long before, but I thought we were already too far away to turn back. When we finally arrived, he motioned with his hand for me to go in first. As soon as I crossed the door, my stomach tightened. The place was messy with clothes and dishes everywhere, and there was no sign of a family. I asked where his wife and kids were. He didn't answer. He turned the lock on the door and said, "I'm going to get the bandage." He came back from the kitchen with one, knelt down and carefully stuck it onto my knee. But while he was holding my leg, with his other hand he slowly stroked it up and down. "You're strong," he said, smiling. "Pretty muscular for your age." I froze. Instinct told me something was wrong. I stood up quickly, saying that my leg already felt fine and that my parents were probably looking for me by now. He only smiled wider and told me to stay for lunch. I didn't want to, but the door was locked and I wasn't sure I'd be able to find my way back on my own. While we ate, he went back to his unsettling questions. Again about my weight, my age, and he muttered, "Perfect weight." I nervously asked what he meant, but he just kept smiling. Then there was a loud thump in the back bedroom. Patrick's smile vanished. He rushed back there, slammed the door shut, and started yelling. I couldn't make out all the words, but I clearly remember him saying, "I told you not to move. I have company." When he came back, he was calm again, almost cheerful. "Sorry," he said. "My wife is sick. She can't be around people." After a little while, a pale, exhausted woman slipped out of the room. Her face was streaked with tears and her eyes were red. She murmured, "I'm hungry." Patrick's expression twisted and he barked at her to go back inside. She glanced sideways at me before obeying. By then I was terrified. When Patrick pulled out a set of children's clothes and suggested I try them on, I burst into tears. He hugged me tightly and said, "It's okay, little guy. Nothing bad is going to happen. Trust me." When he went back into the bedroom, I knew it was my only chance. I unlocked the door and slipped out, running as quietly as I could. The forest felt endless, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away from that cabin as possible. In the distance, I heard him shouting, first at his wife and then out toward the trees. "Where did you go, kid? Come back. You don't have to try on the clothes. I've got toys for you." His voice echoed, desperate and angry. I hid behind a tree, holding my breath. Through the branches, I saw him outside, scanning the forest with his eyes. Then he went deeper in, calling for me. That gave me all the push I needed. I started running. It felt like forever, but eventually I stumbled into a clearing and saw my family's cabin. My dad was outside, pacing with a panicked look on his face. As soon as he saw me, I ran into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I told him everything in a rush, that Patrick had touched my leg, that he'd asked me strange questions, that he'd locked me in and lied about having a family. My dad's face hardened immediately. He called the rental office, and they confirmed that no one had rented the cabin Patrick had taken me to. We packed our bags on the spot and demanded a refund for the remaining days. The cabin manager called the police. They went to check the place, but by the time they got there, Patrick and his wife were gone. There were clothes and belongings scattered inside, but no trace of them. We never heard anything more. The police didn't follow up, and to this day, I don't know who Patrick really was or what he wanted from me. The only thing I'm sure of is that his name was almost certainly fake and that he definitely wasn't a veteran. Sometimes I think about that pale woman and wonder if she was there of her own free will. Story 2. I was about 14 years old when all of this happened, and at that time I was not exactly in the best place mentally. I had been dealing with anxiety and depression for a while. That's why I was always on alert and very aware of everything around me. I think that's the reason I remember every tiny detail of that night so clearly. It burned itself into my mind, and I've never fully been able to shake it off. That weekend, I had plans to sleep over at my friend's house. Usually, she was the one who came over to mine, so this was the first time I would spend the night at her place. I felt both excited and uneasy, especially because I had never been to her house before, and she lived in a pretty unusual place. To give you an idea, her house, or rather the way she lived there, was strange compared to what I knew. The property sat on a steep road in the middle of the bush. When you turned down the driveway, the first thing you saw was this massive mansion, towering over everything else. At first glance, it looked luxurious, almost out of place. But as you continued down the drive, there were two small, rundown units at the bottom. One was basically just a bedroom, and the other had a bedroom with a tiny bathroom and a little kitchenette. My friend's room was in the unit that was only a bedroom, while her mother stayed in the other unit, the one with the bathroom and kitchen. Her space was also divided in a weird way. The landlord used part of her room as storage and had put up a room divider and a big shelving unit to block off that area. At the front of her room, there was a large sliding glass door, and at the back, hidden behind all the stored stuff, there was another door. You couldn't reach that one without going around outside and squeezing between things. To make it even more unsettling, the property was surrounded entirely by thick Australian bushland. And when I say thick, I mean you could barely see a few meters in before the trees swallowed everything. Anyone who has been out in the Australian bush knows how dense it can be and how full of life it is. Spiders, leeches, ants, practically everything you don't want crawling on you. Early in the day, we went over to her mom's unit for something, maybe to get food or to ask about the phone signal. I remember we called out to her, and her voice answered from the bathroom. But just as we walked past the little window, I swear I heard a male voice outside saying, "Yeah." I froze on the spot because there shouldn't have been anyone out there. My friend heard it too. We looked at each other, confused. If her mom was right in front of us, why had we heard a man replying from outside? We tried to brush it off. Neither of us wanted to say it out loud, but we both knew something about it didn't make sense. When night fell, the feeling got heavier. We went to use the bathroom in her mom's unit, trying not to wake her because she was already asleep. On the short walk back to my friend's room, we froze halfway. There was something standing at the tree line. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but they weren't. I could see two faint reflections, eyes watching us. I still remember how my chest tightened when I realized it wasn't an animal. The spacing wasn't right. It was a man. Whoever he was, he didn't move. He just stood there staring, hidden in the shadows of the trees. I panicked and quickly snapped a photo with my phone before we bolted back to the room. We slammed the glass door shut, locked it, and yanked the curtains closed. My hands were shaking as I turned up the brightness on the photo, but the image confirmed it. There was a man standing among the trees watching us. We tried to call my mom, who lived an hour away, but she told us it was probably nothing, and that we shouldn't scare ourselves. That dismissive response didn't comfort us much. Even so, after a while, we tried to distract ourselves by putting on a movie, something light, just to get our minds off what we thought we had seen. We had probably gotten about half an hour in when, at the exact same time, we both turned the volume down. There were footsteps outside, slow, heavy crunches on the leaves, close enough that we knew someone was right there. It wasn't just someone walking past. They stopped and then started moving toward the narrow path that led to the back door hidden behind all that storage. We climbed onto the bed, peeking over the room divider, our eyes fixed on the back door. For a moment, everything went silent, and then the doorknob started to rattle. Gently at first, then harder, like someone was testing it. My heart dropped. The only reason that door didn't open was because it was blocked by all the landlord's junk piled up against it. The rattling grew quicker and more violent until suddenly it stopped. Whoever was outside went still and silent, We huddled together, whispering to each other not to make a sound. After what felt like an eternity, the crunch of footsteps returned, this time moving away and circling around toward the front of the room. That was when I dialed the police with trembling hands. Trying to explain to the operator what was happening while I was sobbing wasn't easy, but she said they would send a patrol and told us to stay where we were. While we waited, another sound cut through the night, a sharp ringing, like one of those old landline phones. It was coming from the landlord's mansion at the top of the hill. It rang for minutes, long enough for us to stare at each other in horror, until we finally heard his voice answering. We couldn't make out what he was saying, but from the timing, it seemed connected. Then we noticed something new. Handprints on the glass sliding door, the kind that are left when someone presses their palm against it and drags it downward. Neither of us had touched it before. Eventually, the landlord came striding down to my friend's mom's unit, visibly angry, and said that the police had called him. He bragged that he had told them not to bother coming. Her mom came to check on us, but she didn't seem even close to as worried as we were. That made it even more terrifying, the way they both acted as if nothing was happening. At that point, we were done. There was no way we were staying the night. I called my mom again, and finally, she came to pick us up around midnight. The next day, when we took my friend back, her mom told us that something else had happened after we left. She said that the post outside her place, the one they had set in concrete and fastened with zip ties for support, had been knocked over during the night. It was solid. There was no way the wind had brought it down. To this day, I don't know who was out there that night. Maybe it was the landlord, maybe someone else. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing through the bush. They were trying to get in. Story 3. Some time ago, my friend Claire asked me if I wanted to go with her to a birthday party. It was for a girl named Anna, with whom she had been very close in lower secondary school when they both went to the same private Catholic school. By the time they reached high school, Claire ended up going to a public school, where she and I met, while Anna attended another Catholic high school. They barely saw each other anymore, so Claire didn't want to go alone. Anna's parents had rented a cabin for her birthday. Apparently, the year before they had done the same thing, and she had managed to throw a big party without her parents fully finding out. That night was supposedly a success, so she planned to repeat the formula. When we arrived by car, I remember how isolated everything felt. There wasn't another house or cabin in sight, just dense forest that seemed to swallow the road we had come down. In winter, the place felt more abandoned than festive. We had to use our phone flashlights to find the path to the front door. Once inside, everything seemed normal enough. There was music, people were drinking, and Anna was in a good mood. But I quickly noticed there were two groups that didn't mix. Anna's close friends and classmates stayed on one side, while another group hovered separately. At one point, Claire nudged me so I would look at a guy leaning against the wall. He had the name of our city tattooed on his neck in uneven letters. We exchanged glances and tried not to laugh, although part of me was wondering what kind of people these were. It didn't take long for the tension between the two groups to become obvious. I heard someone mutter that those guys hadn't even brought their own drinks and were helping themselves to everyone else's. There were also rumors going around that one of them was on probation. Eventually, someone suggested telling them that a park ranger would be coming by to check and that there could only be a couple of cars on the property. The idea spread quickly, and shortly after, that group left. People breathed a sigh of relief, and it seemed like the plan had worked, except it hadn't. A few minutes later, one of the girls from that same group came back in, strolling in like nothing was wrong. She raised her voice and said she wanted to wish Anna a happy birthday. The tone she used made everyone fall silent. Almost immediately, we heard the sound of glass shattering in a room at the back. Then another crash, and another. People started screaming as more windows broke, one after another. I remember staying seated, in shock, not moving. Claire and I had only been at that party for about half an hour, and suddenly it felt like we were in the middle of an ambush. That same girl casually mentioned that at least one of the guys had a gun, which made everything worse. Most of us stayed huddled inside, though a couple of brave people went out to check. After a while, some began to leave in small groups. We were all nervous about going out into the dark, but staying didn't feel much better. At one point, 3 girls who had planned to spend the night there decided they'd had enough. They gathered their things, arms full of pillows and overnight bags, and headed for the door. As soon as they stepped outside, screams rang through the forest. The 3 of them rushed back in, dropping half their stuff. One of them even burst into tears. It turned out the screams weren't from the guys, but from another girl who was arriving late to the party, and when she saw her friend, she screamed with excitement. Looking back, it's almost funny, but in that moment nobody was laughing. Claire and I stayed longer than we wanted to. It didn't feel right to leave Anna when the place had emptied out so much. By the time we finally left, it was almost 2 in the morning and only a couple of people were still with her. We all thought about calling the police, but between the underage drinking and Anna's fear of her parents finding out, the idea was dropped. She even said she would make up some excuse about the broken windows. It still surprises me that she wasn't more worried about the possibility of those guys coming back. But I guess everyone handles stress in their own way. They never did come back, and nothing worse happened. Even so, the night was incredibly strange. Of all the parties I've ever been to, that was the most surreal. Partly because of how quickly everything escalated, and partly because of how absurd it all seemed once it was over. Story 4. When I was a kid, my family hardly ever took trips. Money was always tight, and even though my dad was good at his job, he was never good with finances. He worked from home as a programmer and sometimes landed big contracts that paid well. But the debts chasing him and the way my mom handled the household budget meant we rarely saw much of that money. Vacations were a luxury we didn't expect. Most summers we either visited relatives or stayed home. That's why whenever something different came up, it really stood out. At the time of this story, I was 11 years old. My older sister Ariel was 14, and my younger sister Belle was just 8. Our parents were in their late 30s, always stressed but still trying to give us memories. I remember the night it all started because we were together watching a horror movie, Final Destination, which my dad loved for reasons I will never understand. Belle was already clinging to our dog, Duchess, pretending she wasn't terrified, while Dad chuckled every time something absurd happened on screen. Halfway through the movie, the phone rang. Dad answered and then called Mom into the kitchen, leaving the 3 of us with the film paused and Duchess trapped in Belle's arms. When they came back, they had this strange kind of excitement about them. Dad explained that the client he had just finished a project for owned a cabin in the mountains and was letting us use it for the weekend for next to nothing. That kind of thing never happened to us, so we were over the moon. Mom began packing immediately as if we were moving to another country, stuffing clothes into bags, gathering food, checking lists over and over again. The next day after school, we loaded up the van and started the 2.5-hour drive. It was dark by the time we arrived, and the road heading up seemed endless. The cabin sat beside a quiet lake surrounded by trees so dense you couldn't see anything else. Inside it was cozy, though a bit worn, like a place that had been used a lot. There was a low loft, almost like a crawl space, with shelves full of board games that Ariel immediately claimed as her corner. Mom and Dad took the biggest bedroom. Ariel chose the smaller one, which left Belle and me sharing a queen bed in the remaining room. The only strange thing was the closet in our room. It was sealed shut, and nobody could open it. We joked that maybe there was treasure or skeletons inside, but deep down it just made the room feel unfinished. That first night, Belle and I went to bed around 11. I ended up on the side near the lamp because she kicked in her sleep, and I didn't want her knocking the lamp over with one of her flailing legs. Sometime after I drifted off, I woke up to Belle's nails digging into my arm. Her eyes were wide open. She was whispering frantically and pointing at the window. When I turned my head, I caught a glimpse of something pale, like the outline of a person pulling away from the glass outside. My brain was still half asleep, so it took a second to process. But then a rush of adrenaline hit and I yanked Belle out of the bed. We ran to our parents' room, blurting out what we had seen. Dad tried to calm us down, saying it was probably our imagination. Mom reminded us that we were in the mountains, where shadows and animals could trick tired eyes. Even though I wasn't convinced, I nodded, partly because I didn't want to argue. Belle refused to sleep next to the window again, so we swapped sides and I read to her until she fell asleep. The next day we explored the lake a bit before heading into the nearest town. It was a small place with antique shops and cafes, and my parents seemed determined to go into every store. We spent almost the entire day there and didn't come back until late. As we drove the van up the cabin's driveway, Ariel made a joke that had us laughing, but Dad suddenly went quiet and held up his hand for us to be silent. He went up onto the porch, pushed the door open with just one finger, and stood there for a moment. There was something about the way the door moved, unlocked, no deadbolt, that twisted my stomach, even though I didn't understand why at the time. We waited outside while he disappeared inside. When he finally called us in, his face was serious. He locked the door behind us and took Mom into their bedroom. Ariel distracted Belle and me with one of the board games until they came back. Dad sat with us trying to act normal, but I noticed how often his eyes flicked toward the windows. That night, Dad told us to go to bed earlier than usual. Ariel was annoyed, but Belle and I didn't argue. We went back to the queen bed, this time with Belle on the side by the lamp and me by the window. I read to her again until she fell asleep, and then I slowly drifted off myself. What woke me up was Dad bursting into our bedroom. He lifted Belle with one arm, grabbed my wrist with the other, and dragged us out into the hallway. Mom was already there, pulling Ariel along. Duchess, our dog, was at the back door with her hackles raised, letting out a strange growl, almost like a high-pitched whine. Dad didn't explain anything. He shoved us into the van, went back for the dog, and then drove down the mountain road as if something were chasing us. No one said a word the entire drive home, and even when we finally got back, he refused to tell us anything. The next day, Ariel found out the truth, but Belle and I weren't told until years later. What happened was that Dad woke up to faint sounds outside their bedroom window. They weren't animal noises, they were human sounds, low, almost like whispers or moans. When he went to check, he found the front door unlocked, things in the kitchen moved, and the back door slightly open. Duchess was rigid, growling at whatever was beyond that door. That was when he decided to get us out of there immediately. When he went back later that same day to collect our belongings, he found several footprints, several pairs, pressed into the dirt right outside the window of the room where Belle and I had been sleeping. Seeing them made everything clear that he hadn't wanted to say the night before. Story 5. A couple of summers ago, I moved out on my own for the first time to work at a children's activity camp, tucked deep in the forest, about an hour and a half from where I grew up. All the staff lived together in huge shared cabins. Each one housed around 40 people, and almost always 2 or 3 of us shared a room. The cabins were so massive that even though everyone's stuff was scattered everywhere, they never felt cramped. On top of that, people basically treated each other's rooms like common areas, going in and out without worrying about locking the doors. In the first few days, everyone quickly formed small, tight-knit friend groups. People swapped stories from previous summers at the camp, and an easy, pleasant sense of familiarity settled in, one that maybe made us a little too trusting. My job was split between daytime activities with the kids and night shifts at the camp bar, which served staff and the parents staying on site. One afternoon, my roommate, I'll call her Jess, finished her shift at the bar a couple of hours before I did. She decided to go back to the room to read while she waited for me, so we could watch a movie together later. Not even 5 minutes had passed since she left when my phone lit up with her name on the screen. The bar was almost empty, just a handful of coworkers around, so I picked up, expecting it was just to coordinate plans. As soon as I answered, there was nothing on the other end. No breathing, no static, just complete silence. I figured she'd called me by accident and hung up without thinking much about it. A minute later, a friend from the room across the hall called me urgently, telling me I needed to come back to our room right away. I asked a colleague to cover me for a few minutes and hurried down the corridor, a knot forming in my stomach. When I got there, a small group was gathered outside with worried looks on their faces. And when I walked in, I saw Jess frozen in the middle of the room, tears streaming down her face, completely out of character for her. The whole room was scattered across the floor, drawers half open, and my side, usually tidy because I keep it almost compulsively neat, was a mess. Jess explained that her phone had gone missing. When I mentioned the call, she had no idea what I was talking about, which meant someone had taken it and used it to call me while she wasn't there. It wasn't an expensive phone either, just a cheap little thing, which made it even stranger, because it had no real resale value. In the days that followed, more things started to disappear, but nothing valuable or typical of a regular theft. Instead, the intruder took personal, intimate items, underwear from both sides of the room, even from the laundry pile. That made my stomach turn, especially because we all knew each other. We worked and lived together. There were a few more silent calls from Jess's phone in the days after that, adding to how disturbing it all felt. We eventually reported everything to the supervisors. They said they would investigate, but they also pointed out that leaving the door unlocked hadn't been the smartest thing to do, which, looking back, I had to agree with. A few days later, I walked into the staff lounge and saw Jess's phone sitting on the windowsill, completely alone, with no one around and no explanation. I left immediately and locked myself in our room until she got back. From then on, we were extremely careful. Nothing was ever resolved. No one was caught. And even though years have passed, I still think about who might have done it, how they knew our routines, and why they chose to take such personal items instead of anything of real value. It taught me a lot about trust, privacy, and the fact that some people can be disturbingly calculating even in a place that feels safe.